You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm your host, Dmitri. Well, wait a second. It's another Tristra takeover of Music Tectonics. Today, we have a conversation with Tristra and Mansoor Rahmat Khan, who's the founder and CEO of Beethoven.ai, which is an ethically trained music generator that was built in partnership with hundreds of artists. They talk about the initial inspiration behind Beethoven, as well as Mansoor's background in machine learning and music. They also dive into the nitty-gritty of how Beethoven worked in collaboration with musicians to secure fully licensed content. But first, the news.
Rock, paper, scanner.
And here we are once again with our chief writer and strategist, Tristra Yeager. Hey, Tristra.
Hey, Dmitri. It's great to be back. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And there's actually quite a bit of news this week. I think some of this stuff is very tactical, in the weeds stuff. What's going on in the music industry is paralleling a lot of things that are going on in society as well.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Let's dive in with some of the articles that you found this week.
Well, these are, of course, from the Rock Paper Scanner. So it's been found by a lot of us, but these are some things that have been on my mind. Billboard had a wonderful piece focused mostly on Latin music artists, but the message still resonates for a whole business. And the header is how visa issues are threatening artists' careers and the music companies that work with them. Now, Dmitri, you and I have a long history of grappling with these issues. We used to do a lot of work with international artists back in the day, and the visa issues were always one of the biggest looming factors in what would bring someone to the US to be able to tour or not, and how would we approach publicity. But it's coming for everyone, and this isn't just affecting artists from places like Mexico, it's affecting artists from the UK. So I've heard of some recent cancellations for festivals that were maybe more of a niche audience, but still pretty decent sized festivals, where some pretty big acts had to cancel because they had no security. They had no guarantee they were going to be able to make, even with priority processing, et cetera, and all the extra fees that come with that. They really didn't know if they were going to make it to the US in time for the festival. So I think that makes it much, much harder to plan. And I know festivals are already hurting. And there have been a lot of examples of financial turmoil in festivals in the US this year already. So this is like yet another little straw that's being piled on this poor camel's back.
And it's also kind of parallels some of the impact that the tariffs are also having on this cross-border global trade. And with the tariffs, obviously, a lot of companies, not just foreign companies, are struggling because their supply chain is very diverse at this point. We've kind of let it turn into a thing where there's parts coming, any given product might have parts from several countries. They might pass through several countries. The tariffs just put a screeching halt on a lot of trade, not only because of the higher prices that get passed on to consumers, but because everyone is kind of scrambling to figure out, well, can we keep manufacturing the way we are and still stay profitable? This is what's happening on the live and ticketing side of the music industry, where all of a sudden, where you would count on touring to different markets, a lot of Latin American, Mexican artists touring in the United States, that's part of how you release a record or how you do a tour, et cetera. All that kind of, I wouldn't say it's coming to a screeching halt, but it's making people have these challenges that you mentioned. And also, part of what that Billboard article by Griselda Flores it says is that people are going to just think about it differently. Like, maybe we're not even going to bother even trying.
Yeah,
because
and this is right when artists like Bad Bunny and others are really breaking into the quote-unquote mainstream music market. So other fans who wouldn't consider themselves Latino or whatever, or Latin music fans traditionally, are getting interested in these artists. And right at that moment, it's harder and harder to book them and book the other maybe more emerging or mid-career figures who maybe aren't as huge as Bad Bunny, but who could, because of Bad Bunny's work, for example, could win over more listeners. So it's a real blow to what's already happening in the sort of tidal change of listeners' tastes in the US. We used to be very provincial, very stuck on English language, and that's no longer the case. And that's really to our detriment, that we're not able to experience these artists live and to build a stronger fan connection with them through a live performance. So
one thing One thing I will say before we move on to the next article is music has a power that's like nothing else, and it can jump borders without having all this infrastructure in place as well. So the music's going to continue to live here. The fans are going to continue to want it. And this is the kind of thing where I think over time, society could feel more pressure to loosen up these. I mean, like fandoms are very powerful is what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah, yeah. So BTS
it could
Army
help.
and everyone who loves Latin music, it's time to make your voice heard.
Yes.
Well, in other news, I want to move on to some other news, Dmitri, that's also sadly involves international relations in a bizarre way. Music Business Worldwide had a great summary of all of the negotiations swarming around TikTok yet again. It's like, can we just fix this or just stop talking about it? I don't know if everyone else has TikTok deal fatigue, but I have a little bit of it. Nonetheless, there was a good recap in MBW. Trump administration, China, reached framework, and this is in quotes, for deal to keep TikTok operating in the U.S. So there's an interesting consortium of people here in the U.S., including Andreessen Horowitz and Oracle, and honestly, all these people that have no business running a social platform, in my humble opinion, who are going to get involved. And it makes me wonder, like, with some of the, just from a music industry perspective, with some of the questioning that we're seeing from people, I mean, maybe not questioning, but just the research that media recently put out about viral songs and how come that doesn't really build an artist's career the way one would expect. Is the music industry, what's going to happen with the music industry and TikTok? Is it going to become less relevant? I don't know. Or is it going to become more relevant? We're in a very strange point with that, with what's felt like it was going to be a big site for where music careers would get made, right? I mean, you think back to Lil Nas X and Old Town Road and like how that changed the way people were talking about TikTok. We're at a really different point now, and it's not that long since those moments.
Well, there's some other factors that I think about with this one as well, Trisha. For one, like Oracle, the founder of Oracle is one of the players involved with this consortium, and Oracle's been hosting the data for TikTok, I think, all along. And so in some ways, this has less to do with what's the best business strategy or cultural strategy for TikTok and more to do with, okay, if the data is on American soil, then the government is doing its job of protecting it from China. But the other, that's sort of what's at stake here.
Yeah,
that's
exactly. And now we've got a government. You're like, who do we need protecting from again?
Yeah, exactly. But also, still in this conversation, reported in Wall Street Journal and CNN and other places too, is what's going to happen with the algorithm? Who's going to own the algorithm? China is saying you can't own the algorithm.
Oh, yeah. Good luck with that.
And so there's this idea that the algorithm's going to somehow be licensed. But
how does one own an algorithm when you're talking about a global company like ByteDance, right? That's a really, like, how do like geographical borders apply to algos? That's a question I'd love to hear like a lawyer talk about, and maybe a computer scientist with a little bit of a political science background. All of those things to me are fascinating questions. It's not just about where the data is, right? Because the data is kind of everywhere. That was the problem. Like TikTok couldn't isolate US data, and I think they called it like Operation Texas. They couldn't do it.
Yeah. And the data is going to be flowing back and forth, even if the data is here and the algorithm somehow is processing things in China. The data is also in China. It doesn't really compute or add up altogether.
Yeah. I would love to hear someone talk more about that, the nitty gritty of that, and like, what does this all mean? Speaking
of large social media platforms that have been involved in politics in some way, there was the big Meta event, Meta Connect 2025, and we've got this Engadget article, everything Meta announced at Connect 2025, talking about new Ray-Ban Metas and now Oakley Metas and so forth. What did you take out of that one?
Well, what was most interesting for me was not the glasses, which they feel like glass hole 2.0, like some of Google's attempts at early eye computing, as I think people are trying to call it now. You don't look as dumb as when you're wearing a VR headset around in the world, but you still look kind of dumb. And there was some unfortunate press photography. Just as a publicist, I was like, ooh, that was not a good shot. Anyway, that said, there is a really cool controller that comes with one of the Ray-Ban models that it's basically like a wrist device that allows you to use gestural control. And that if you think about like voice plus gesture, you're starting to get at something that feels like it could be a wearable computer. The gestural stuff is also really exciting because I know there's a lot of music tech interest in gestural control via MIDI. Like I'm thinking about Mimu gloves, and there's all sorts of really neat things that people have come up with for gestural control. And that to me is like, if Meta's doing a lot of R&D here, we may start to see some really interesting software and like hardware bits and bobs that allows us to build interesting new music tech devices that can be controlled by the most natural musical way, which is moving our bodies. And that to me is super exciting and inspiring. So I hope this is bringing a new era of music tech innovation using our bodies.
I'll push back a little bit on the look.
Yeah.
There might have been some bad photos. There was definitely some cringe moments in Zuck's presentation and demo of this.
Yeah.
But I think there's more people wearing these than you might realize on the street. Maybe not in Bloomington, Indiana.
Yeah, definitely not in the rural area where I live.
Probably in San Francisco and New York and places. And there were some other interesting things in there too. There's even the opportunity for showing captions of live speech for people with hearing disabilities as well.
There's some super cool accessibility things that could happen with the glasses. Though I also heard video calls, and I'm like having Zoom, like wearing my Zoom as I walk around, just sounds like we're going to have a lot more pedestrian accidents.
People are already doing with AirPods.
I guess the audio, you have your vision clear. So if you're about to run into a bus or trip over a crack in the sidewalk or something, I don't know. I'm wondering if we can start to correlate the number of pedestrian accidents and the adoption of these devices.
I will say that there's a lot of interesting new hardware coming out, which is nice to see that there's this creativity that you're talking about. We will definitely see some of that in Music Tectonics this November. There's some interesting new devices that are going to be demoed. Hopefully our conference goers will get to see some stuff for the first time. I don't know if any of it will be AR or VR. It'll definitely be music making though, and it'll be a blast.
That'll be so much fun. And I can't imagine anything more fun than playing with some quirky, cool new music tech by the ocean.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for the roundup. Tristra, let's go on to our feature.
Why should your startup attend the Music Tectonics conference? First, the networking. This conference is designed with time, space, and atmosphere to help you truly connect. We're talking real conversations, not rushed introductions. Second, getting business done. Every year, startups meet new partners, clients, and even investors. With built-in breaks and casual hangouts, Music Tectonics gives you the space to build relationships outside of panels and keynotes. And third, leveling up. The third day of the conference is all about startups. Programming and networking are designed specifically to help you move to the next phase of your business. Whether you're raising, scaling, or launching something bold, Music Tectonics is where innovation meets opportunity.
Now for our feature interview.
Hey, Mansoor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Well, I have been wanting to talk to you again for years. We first crossed paths, I think it was back in 2023 at South by Southwest, and had a fascinating conversation. So I'm excited to get to share some of your ideas and perspectives with our listeners. But before I go too far down any crazy rabbit holes, I want to ask you to tell me a bit about Beethoven. What do you tell people, say someone you're meeting at a party or on a plane, about Beethoven and what it does?
So Beethoven is essentially a generative music tool that helps content creators make background music for videos, games, and podcasts. That's essentially what we do in a one line. But the interesting part about Beethoven is the way it's built. It's been trained on fully licensed content in official partnerships with musicians and the music industry, which makes us a very unique company in the whole AI space.
Yeah, especially when many, many people are saying that licensing just can't be done. I mean, they're going to build AGI in the next 5 years, but somehow they can't license music. It's a strange world.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it seems strange at this point. But I feel like at some point, people will start realizing it. It's always the thing about tech bubbles, right? Like in the initial phase, you always have this thing, okay, it works, it's exciting, and it's fascinating. And people often overlook all the other aspects of it. But eventually the world starts realizing, and I'm already starting to see that happen now. And now slowly people are going to move in the direction and be like, oh no, we need to have licensing mechanisms. We need to pay artists. This is not sustainable. So that's just how all tech cycles work, in my opinion.
I like your sanguine and chill approach, and I think that's really amazing. So, you founded Beethoven, though, before this big AI bubble really got started, and before, jokingly, before generative AI was cool. So, what got you into AI in the first place? How did you get into this crazy world of generative AI?
I was working in machine learning since 2014,
Mm-hmm.
specifically in the space of music. So I got inspired in my undergrad days to find a space that lies at the intersection of two of my main interests, that is math and music.
Mm-hmm.
And machine learning was basically just starting to catch steam back in those days. It wasn't so big as it is right now, but it was
Mm-hmm.
something. And it was predominantly at that point signal processing and understanding music signals and all of that stuff. I started working in that space early on and always wanted to do something in the space. Kept coming back to it over and over again. Went for my master's at Georgia Tech. They have a very amazing music technology program. And then post that, I came back to India. I was working at an audio signal processing startup. So I was always in this space in AI and machine learning and music. And then finally ended up like, I need to just start a company in the space. We had no clue that we would be building generative AI when we started off,
Mm-hmm.
but it's something we discovered in the initial days. So it was collectively decided between me and Siddharth, my other co-founder, who also is a music technologist. And we were like, we are going to work on the production music space. And two AI music guys working together on a production music space, generative music was supposed to happen. So
I see.
that's this how the entire story started.
So the tech fascination and the desire to start something makes a lot of sense especially from your math background. I want to talk a little bit about your musical background. You come from a musical family and you yourself, right? And you yourself are a sitar player. So I'm curious how that experience has influenced how Beethoven got built.
So I do come from a family that's been in music for 7 generations.
Just a
So
few, just a little while.
there's a little while. So that in some sense might seem like a lot of pressure, but it might also
Mm,
seem like a boon because it's got both sides to it. So the pressure side would be like, oh, you belong to such an amazing family and lineage of all these legendary artists, and
hmm.
now the world just expects you to be another legendary artist. That's the default pressure that you have.
Yeah.
And that pressure can get to you very quickly. But at the same time, I did not want to let myself become an artist just because of the pressure. I was born in such a family. But the
Hmm.
other side of it was the values of how I got it from a young age. In terms of, I was very lucky that I got to learn music at a very young age. That's a very fortunate
Hmm.
thing. Not many people get that in the world. And as a result of that, a lot of that shaped my thinking. The artist side of me always keeps thinking creatively on, okay, if I'm building a company, how do I go about doing the right thing and not screw over artists, right? Because
Yeah.
I come from that kind of a background. So naturally, AI music is the most sensitive industry because that's where an artist, the first reaction that they would have is, oh, this is going to replace me.
Hmm.
But not if you make them a part of the business model, right? So that's basically how my background shaped the whole approach of, from day one, we always thought this, that where was the data going to come from? How are we going to train a model? And we just went out there and started talking to artists and started doing deals directly with artists. That was an approach right from the beginning, and we continue to do that to this day.
And growing up is sort of steeped in Indian classical tradition, which, just for our listeners, the approach to music varies dramatically from the Western European approach, how people think about authorship or create the process of creation, the basis of what we Westerners call improvisation, which it's not quite. Composition and improvisation intertwine in a really beautiful way, I think, in Indian classical tradition. Please correct me if I'm getting off base here, if there needs to be more nuance.
No,
But
you're
I'm
pretty much on point.
Okay, thank you. Well, good. I'm glad I'm not completely goofing this up. But I wanted to ask you how that perspective has informed how you approach machine learning. So if we think about the sort of sea of sound that we can work with as creative people, even if we're creating through a machine or through an algorithm, how did you approach that as someone who grew up surrounded by this philosophical approach to music, this musicological world?
That's a great question. You're absolutely right. The way how we approach music in Indian classical music is very different from how it's approached in the Western style of music. For example, we don't have the concept of sheet music in Indian
Hmm.
classical music. It's a completely oral tradition where your teacher or your guru will basically teach you their vast knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to just absorb whatever you can in that 1 hour setting. And there's
No
no like
pressure.
no hand holding. Nobody's going to tell you what to do. You need to keep listening and keep figuring things out. It's a very interesting approach, and the ones who are really serious about it over a period of time, they tend to like learn it really well and then keep
Mm-hmm.
growing. And then they also go beyond their teacher. They will essentially outperform all the knowledge, and they will just discover themselves. So there is a lot of discipline. It's almost like learning some sort of a martial art where you have to wake up
Mm-hmm.
every in the morning, you're sitting down for practice for 6-7 hours, and you're just exploring and going deeper and deeper. Now I think music does require that kind of discipline to become great at what you do, and I think that's applicable for all forms of music. But in Indian classical music, like I said, it's very different approach. We have ragas, we have talas, we have like our own science of how we believe sound. We call it Nadi Yoga. So Nadi Yoga is basically the science of sound,
Mm.
the yoga of sound. That's basically how we see it. And that's basically how we approach music at a very high level. That's a whole rabbit hole if we have to go in that direction.
This could be a 3-hour podcast now. It's going to be a Joe
Exactly.
Rogan length podcast.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is how that has shaped our approach at Beethoven is in the initial days, we used to do a lot of rule-based machine learning before the era of LLMs and diffusion models and all of these new technologies. Back in those days, we would think like, okay, if we were to compose this, how would we teach the machine to compose this, right? So that's how we segregated Indian music from Western music. So we had a whole different approach for Indian music, a whole different algorithm for it. But a lot of that has now gone away. Like now we are purely on the data-driven diffusion-based approaches.
Oh,
Those are much
interesting.
more superior, in my opinion.
Yeah, interesting. I hope that you get a chance to bring some of that philosophical perspective back into that, because I think that we're at an interesting point where we should bring in more of the world's musical learning and not just base it on the data from the West and from the last 50 years or whatever.
It's actually pretty interesting that how these models learn. They extend knowledge beyond from one genre to another. We were doing this experiment just today and yesterday. Like this is so recent. We have now trained a new foundation model, and we were fine tuning it on Indian classical music.
Oh,
So
awesome.
it was trained on all Western genres primarily, and we
Uh-huh.
then tried to see, okay, what does it do if it sees a little bit of the Indian classical data? And fascinating, it was able to generate tabla sounds, pakawat
Interesting.
sounds, all these Indian instruments. And then we tried some experiments like, okay, can you mix Indo music with Western jazz and see what happens? And then it was able to create something. There's this band called Shakti, which
Yeah, of
is,
course. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
Shakti's
that was the,
awesome.
Shakti was one of the biggest names in the Indo-Western collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard that piece, it almost sounded like Shakti. And I was like, wow, this is so cool.
That is really cool. I love
Yeah.
that. That makes me very excited to imagine that we could start having all sorts of different beautiful blends from all over the world. And I think maybe that is one of the avenues that will make generative AI music a new instrument or creation approach. So I would love to talk to you a little bit about Beethoven as a company and how your experiences as an entrepreneur. And I'm wondering, what's a major challenge that you've overcome as an entrepreneur?
I think the biggest challenge, the music industry is a very tough industry, I would have to say.
Yeah.
It's got so many layers and so many different
Mm-hmm.
kinds of people, and we were like complete outsiders. We were musicians and we were technologists. We were not really music industry people.
Mm-hmm.
So we were not from the label or distributor or any of those sides. So we had to build our whole network from the ground up. We had to go out there. I'm sure you have seen me so many times in so many conferences, and this is exactly what I would be doing, like just going, talking to people and just telling them what we do. I
Yeah.
think the most important job of an entrepreneur, in my opinion, is to tell what you're doing, because
Mm-hmm.
that's how the opportunities open up. Because if people want to know that you exist, how would they even reach out to you if there is something that they want to do with you, especially in
Yeah.
an industry that is so tight knit like the music industry? I think that was our biggest challenge, to be present and be visible in the music industry. And I think we did a decent job now when I look back on that front. Yeah.
Yeah, it is important because it is such a relationship-based industry. And especially if you're maybe coming from, it doesn't matter where you're coming from. It could be just as tough if you're coming from Topeka, Kansas or from Goa, right? It
Yeah.
can be equally challenging if you just don't have an in yet. But I'm excited. That's an important challenge to overcome.
Yeah, I'm coming from Goa is also another interesting thing, right? Because I come from a very different culture, very different, and then I moved to San Francisco like a year back.
Yeah.
And it's a different culture, different world. But that's the whole fun part about being an entrepreneur, in my opinion, is because you travel and you meet all these interesting people, you go to all these interesting places, and as a result of that, it just opens up your mind. And then you see the world from two different perspectives, because I have the Indian perspective and the Asian perspective, but I also have the American perspective now. So it's so different from each other, but then you have to find the blend of the two cultures.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious about that. What are some lessons you've learned as a startup in America that you want to share with other founders?
I think the ambition is next level in America.
We're pretty intense.
Yeah, very intense. I think we culturally, Indians are always told to be modest, told to be humble, respect your elders. All of those things are so rooted inside of us. So we will always be shy. We will always think, oh, I hope we are not overstepping boundaries. I hope we are not being too flamboyant and too loud about it. But when I see the American entrepreneurs, I just see like, wow, like these guys are like so confident about what they have. And so many times I've seen founders who have nothing and they are still so confident. And I think it's just a very cultural thing. America teaches people to be really proud about what they're doing, and also teaches them like how to sell things really well. I think the entrepreneurial spirit is very, very strong inside the US in comparison to any other culture that I've seen in the world.
That's a really interesting contrast to point out. So one other thing you're doing, one other challenge you've taken on, I mean, you mentioned the music industry can be a complicated place. You've taken on this challenge of licensing your data. And that is in this day and age when you can get data sets and you have no idea what's in there, right? You're playing AI music on hard mode, so to speak. So I'm wondering, why haven't other people taken this route? And why did you decide that? You said because you were a musician and you really sympathize, but why has this road been so hard, and how have you gotten across the finish line with licensing content?
So that's a great question. So I always believe there are different kinds of people in this world. Some like to play the short game, some like to play the long game. I am one of those people who likes to play the long game. I strongly believe that you cannot build a sustainable business by pissing people off. That is definitely not a sustainable route to building a business, because if you see what has happened in the music industry time and again, is there have been companies that have come, they've pissed off a lot of artists, and then as a result of them, they have pissed off the industry, and then as a result of that, they have been shut down. And this has happened so many times. You can just go back in history and see how many times companies have been shut down by the music industry. And this industry is very notorious when it comes to that, in comparison to most other industries. And I don't see a reason why generative AI is going to be an exception. Something is going to happen there. I don't know what's going to happen, but my thought process is it makes more logical sense to build through collaboration rather than competing with the artists and making them feel that, okay, that's it, AI is going to take over. I mean, those are very dystopian ways of looking at things. Secondly, that's more philosophical, but also from a business standpoint, what we have observed is enterprises or B2B, whenever we go and talk to these customers, the first thing that they want to be wary of is, what have you trained your models on?
Interesting.
If you haven't secured licenses, they don't want to work with you, because the point is nobody wants a lawsuit hanging around their neck, and everybody wants to make sure that, especially in the context of B2B, they want to make sure that, okay, if we are using a API or we are using a AI music platform, they know what they're doing and they have the right licenses to be able to relicense this API to us. So it's more strategic as well. It gives us a business advantage. That has also made us the number one music API in the AI space right now. If you just Google us, you will find us. Every enterprise comes to us and talks to us for AI music API.
Wow, that's really cool. It's nice to hear about someone pursuing the ethical path, the fair path, and winning. That's excellent. So I want to get a little forward looking, maybe a quick little imaginative exercise. AI is changing so fast. So this is a really tough one. For some people, if it's publishing, it's like, what's going to happen in 5 years? They're like, well, probably we'll have slightly better metadata or something. So it's a more gradual change. You guys are on like a roller coaster ride of transformation. What do you see unfolding though in 5 years? How do you imagine artists or creators using generative AI tools? Where do you see these tools going?
I don't even need to go 5 years into the future. I can already see it happening right now. I think artists are always the propellants of culture and technology. They are the ones who take all these tools and like just make things happen. And if you see the top use case that I'm seeing for generative music, generative sampling, that's one of the biggest one. Music producers are sampling and they're creating whole tracks using those samples. So it's just become very easy for them to find all these samples. Before they would go to songs and they would edit them and chop them out and all that. Now they're just generating them. Then you have video creation. It's completely transformed. Users are using all these tools to generate background music, to generate sound effects. Then you also have this entire category of game development where people are like generating follies and SFX. And so all of that is happening. So previously people would rely on stock music, stock footage for doing all of this stuff, but now they've made the switch to generative because it's much more easier, it's much more scalable and much more quicker, at least in the opinions of the users. What happens in 5 years? I think, in my opinion, one, we will definitely see a lot of AI generated playlists, for passive listeners, people who don't care about what they're listening to. They just want the algorithms to keep recommending them something.
They just want the vibe. They're vibe seekers.
You might have music on the basis of, let's say you're doing yoga, or let's say you're in the gym, or you're running, and the music is being generated based on your heart rate, based on your certain biomarkers, parameters. That's very cool, in my opinion. That's definitely. But I also see an alternate world where authenticity is going to rise.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is live music is going to come back much stronger. People are going to invest a lot of their time into more in-person experiences because they are just going to be disappointed and bored of this entire AI slop on the internet.
Yeah.
So I see both of those worlds happening in parallel.
Yeah, I also agree that human aspects like mistakes, wobbles, the sort of the quirks that come with human performance, whether we're singing, playing an instrument, or in a live setting, will start to be valued in a different way. And even now, I think of things like sound baths, right? So the limitations of sound baths in terms of instrumentation and like musical expression don't seem to keep people away, right? They want to have the experience of that, of being bathed in certain frequencies or however they're thinking about it, even though they could put on like an ambient playlist or binaural beats or something like that. So I think you're totally right. There's going to be an interesting bifurcation, I guess, for an interesting fork in the road. Well, thank you, Mansoor, so much for speaking with me about Beethoven and your experience. And this has been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I've been a big fan of the Music Tectonics podcast. Before me and Siddharth started Beethoven, we actually listened to every episode of the Music Tectonics podcast. So it's very special for me to be on this podcast now.
Oh, that's so awesome. I'm so excited that you've come full circle and you're about to announce some pretty exciting things. And it's going to be a big year for Beethoven.
It's going to be a very big year. We are very excited to be announcing later this month our largest foundation model that we have built in the company, which is trained on fully licensed content, probably the biggest one coming out in the world. And it will have the ability to generate instrumental music, sound effects, and eventually even vocals. So we want to give a tough fight to the ones who are scraping and building. We want to license and build and compete with them.
All right. Well, may you be victorious against the scrapers. All right. Thank you, Mansoor.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes for you every week. Did you know we do free monthly online events that you, our lovely podcast listeners, can join? Find out more at musictectonics.com. And while you're there, look for the latest about our annual conference and sign up for our newsletter to get updates. Everything we do explores the seismic shifts that shake up music and technology, the way the Earth's tectonic plates cause quakes and make mountains. Connect with Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. That's my favorite platform. Connect with me, Dmitri Vitsa, if you can spell it. We'll be back again next week, if not sooner.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.